For this last kind of video that I'm doing about this whole snowboarding culture, I don't want to focus on one article. I want to focus on everything that I've read, everything that I've watched, everything that I've researched, and everything that I know about snowboarding myself and my own experiences. I grew up in rural Alberta. I grew up in the country, and I began snowboarding by myself. I grew up in the country, and I had a toy snowboard for some reason got into our possession, my family's possession, many years before I even used it. And I simply one day out of boredom went out to our hill because I loved snow and loved tobogganing, things like that. And I must have been about 16 years old, and I started snowboarding. And later that year, or I believe the next year, that was kind of the late winter, I took all the money that I had saved up and I bought a snowboard. And I bought a snowboard before I had been to an actual hill snowboarding. And I wasn't much of a downhill skier. I'd done it maybe 3 or 4 times in my life prior to that. But it was just something I, from that little toy snowboard, decided I wanted to do. So for me, the influence for snowboarding can almost be linked to the original roots of snowboarding, and that is that I was doing it for myself. I was doing it because when I was going down the hill, I really enjoyed the sensation of it, and it was about me. And ever since then, that has been what's been pushing me to become better at it and do as much snowboarding as I can, and whenever I can. So I find it interesting in looking at all these articles and papers and things like that about the rebellious youth, about what they wore, about everything, because a lot of it I can connect with kind of how I grew up. I wasn't necessarily rebellious against anyone per se. It was just kind of an opportunity that I took up because it was a toy that we had, and then I had some money and I spent my money on a snowboard. But the clothing, you know, it said that it came from an urban setting, the clothing where it was very baggy and just whatever people wore on the streets, and came from kind of the skater attitude where skateboarders could, you know, low-income skaters existed because, you know, the sport was very cheap. And for me, when I first started snowboarding, it was whatever I could find. And so, you know, it almost matched that in a sense, which I thought was really neat. And then, of course, as I progressed along and started making money on my own, I started buying the gear that I wanted and that I could afford. And, you know, more got into actual snowboarding gear. But when I look at my experiences on the ski hill, you know, one of the big issues that a lot of these articles bring up is, you know, the differences between skiers and snowboarders. And I really feel like I'm in a new generation that a lot of these articles and a lot of these movies and things like that might touch on a bit, but haven't really talked about yet, because I still think it's emerging. And that's because my generation of snowboarders are growing up with other youths that are skiing and things like that don't necessarily have roots tied in with the traditional skiing. I know one of the articles that I read talked about the conflict between skiers and snowboarders. And, you know, and I understand why there's a conflict there, and the biggest one in the article that I saw was the actual physical movement of the skiers compared to the snowboarders. Skiers will do more shallow curves that go like this. Snowboarders are going big and wide, and you get a collision. And that makes sense. I get angry when a skier hits me, and a skier gets angry at me when I hit them, vice versa. You know, whose fault it was always depends on the situation. But because of the actual physical movement of both sports, there is that kind of conflict between there. And I understand that conflict for sure. But when I think about it, that conflict, and a lot of times whenever there is an incident where there is a collision between a skier and a snowboarder, myself and a skier, is always somebody that is usually of an older generation than me. And it's usually them that get quite angry and quite defensive in how I was out of line. I have never had an encounter with somebody of my own generation that is riding skis that will ever blame me right off the bat, which I thought was a very interesting observation. I think that my generation understands snowboarding a little bit more, maybe it do snowboard, and understands how we operate. And I understand how skiers work, and I do my best so we don't ever collide. But it seems that the older generation is skiers, just from my observations, hold this grunge or hold this hate towards snowboarders because we're just those people that are different and that have this rebellious youth attitude to come and hit them and whatnot. And not that I'm saying that all skiers are that way, but I'm just finding that only happens with these older skiers. So I think this new generation of my youth, no matter if they're skiers or snowboarders, we understand each other and we cooperate very, very well together on the ski hills. We don't have these traditional routes like the traditional skiers have. We're kind of bridging out on our own and creating our own. And one sport that kind of isn't really talked about a lot in these articles and movies is actually the freestyle skiing that is really taken over by youth and is touched on a little bit. And that's basically the skiers that are more like snowboarders. And they're doing tricks. They're out there doing tricks. They have, twin tip skis that more emulate a snowboard. And, when I think about it, when I'm on the ski hill, I see no difference between them and myself. There is no difference whatsoever. And there's no lines. We share similar clothing. We talk the same talk. And I think that we can almost attribute that to just being a generation that grew up together and that cooperates very well. But other than that, I think the future of snowboarding is going to be very interesting as my generation and maybe generations that are a little bit older than me grow older with the sport. It's still such a young sport and it's still growing that it's very interesting where it's going to go. One of the articles pointed out actually that snowboarding was, every other snow sport, I should point out, or mostly activity, was created for transportation. So that was the main goal of it in the beginning. It was created for transportation. And that's very true with skiing, snowshoeing, almost even tobogganing, you could argue, with the dog sled. But snowboarding wasn't created for transportation at all. It was purely for pleasure. So it's interesting to see this sport evolve as it goes, and we see it evolving even in my generation. The train parks, for example, for freestyle snowboarding are getting bigger and more creative every year that I go out to the hills. I go out to the hills and, at first you would see jumps for some hills and then you saw rails. And now you'll see buses in there that you can go off. You'll see all these features that you wouldn't even think that you could snowboard on. And they're putting them on the ski hills in the train park, in a man-made park. So the creativity that's in there is huge. And that is being translated even into the freestyle skiers. So, I could never predict where snowboarding is going to go from here. Things are getting bigger, things are getting more creative, and I think that's the nature of this sport, and I hope it stays that way. And what I gotta say is it's going to be an interesting road from here on with the future of snowboarding. As far as snowboarding culture goes, I have to say it's really a mix of what it is, and I have to say that it's definitely the media that makes it. Like I've mentioned before in my previous video, the media markets it as a youth rebellious sport. It's the cool factor why people want to join it. And when you actually get to meet people on the hill and things like that, they might have this image and have this certain look, and they might have sold out to say, but you know what, individually we're all so different and we all just are out there for one reason, and that's just to really enjoy it, be creative, to be in touch with nature and have fun. So that's what snowboarding is all about, and that's what I take away from it. It's still all about that.